Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, and welcome back to what is the fifth episode of Bible Book by Book or Quadruple B. For those of you just joining us at this time, fuck off YouTube, shut the hell up. For those of you just joining us here for the first time, we are going to be reading the entirety of the Bible, New American Standard translation, going through all of the different lines and pointing out some discrepancies, whether they be historical, literal, or what have you. Today we are going to be covering Genesis 18 through 20, which is basically everything immediately before Sodom and Gomorrah, right up until like about a chapter or so afterwards. Just as a kind of a little bit of a epilogue to everything. Um, so while I am here and still able to look at the comments, let me just hear from all you guys. Do I sound okay? Is everything all right so far? I think it is because I just heard myself back with the obnoxious YouTube tab, but I think we should be fine. It's just nobody's watching. Of course, nobody's watching. I doubt that YouTube sent out a notification to literally anyone. And if you are watching, you probably came here from the Discord. Doesn't this site work so well? Okay. Let me get my notes here together. Is there anyone out there? Uh-oh. That's bad. That's bad. I don't know what to tell you. This is really fucking annoying that I have to sit around and wait for YouTube to wake the hell up and actually, send people the notification to this sort of thing. Danny Doodle Dude, welcome. We are just waiting for people to saunter in here as of right fucking now, because YouTube couldn't be bothered to send out a notification right at 2 o'clock, letting people know that we are coming in. Okay, and oh my god. Anastasia, I apologize if I am butchering your name. I just randomly saw that you were live in the subcategory on the app. That is about the only way that you are going to know that I'm live. Salem got no notification, but tuned in at the right time. I'm glad that, you guys are on top of things enough to, like, come in and join us for when we are live, but at the same time I'm just really fucking pissed off because I keep hearing that YouTube keeps fucking up their own very basic shit. All right. Give me a little bit of a drink. By the way, if I do start yawning or otherwise acting a little bit tired throughout today's stream, the issue is I just got done working a midnight shift, and actually I have to go in again at 10:30 to do another midnight. So I'm operating on only a few hours of sleep, just based between my commute and everything else. So if I do start doing that, just please be patient with me. I have autism. Okay, so StreamYard says we got like 5 viewers. I'm not sure what YouTube is saying. Oh, YouTube doesn't even tell me. That's great. God, I love this fucking site. It's so. Oh no, wait. There it is. There it is. All right, so we got about 5 people watching. Whatever. That's fine. I'm sure more people will join as we go along. But as of right now, I do kind of want to just immediately jump into things here because we do have a surprising amount to cover today. So let's move swiftly along. As I said before, I will not be able to read chat whilst also, just going through all the different tabs. So if you do have any questions, I will try to address them as we go through the different chapter breaks. And if you do think of something in between them, please leave them in the comments and I will address them as we go along. So, anyway, let me get the fucking banner going here. Like I said, we're going to be starting at Genesis 18. And this one is partially fucking terrible and pointless. And another part just like, well, I mean, you'll see what happens. It's very annoying at the end. I will spoil you that much. By the way, I did crack and I bought. No, I didn't buy it, but I downloaded a second PDF viewer just because the scrolling on the online PDF reader for whatever reason was a complete and total bitch. The only problem is it copied all of the highlights that I had previously made to this document. So you can't see my notes as I wrote them, but you'll basically just see like wherever I have the text highlighted, that is where I left a note. That's all that means. Don't pay too much mind to it. In any case, kicking things off with 18:1. And Jehovah appeared unto him by the Mokes of Mamre, as he sat in a tent door in the heat of the day. I guess I should immediately just start with where we last left off. In Genesis 17, God had appeared before Abraham, and now he is named Abraham. And as a part of the covenant, he made him every man cut off, part of his penis with the circumcision thing. And he also said, hey, by the way, your firstborn son is about to get shafted in favor of this second son, which I am prophesizing to you now. Wait a minute. Hold on. Are we sharing? Yeah, no. We're sharing the right tab. Okay. StreamYard is being very strange. Don't worry. Once I have better internet, I am definitely going to upgrade to OBS. It's just as of right now, my shitty computer cannot handle it. And my shitty internet is barely broadcasting this live as of right now. So just a reminder from last time, it is speculated that this God, the Jehovah who appeared to Abraham, and the one who made the same covenant with him in the previous chapter, appears frequently throughout Genesis up to this point, is more than likely not the God of the Hebrews as we know him. As despite Jay frequently referring to this figure as Yahweh, or Jehovah in this case, he is introduced to us back in Genesis 12 as El Shaddai, a frequent monocherm for the Canaan god El. Adding a little bit more evidence to this is the fact that God appears to Abraham as an epiphany, something the God of Exodus is really not known to do. He mostly just kind of takes divine form as a burning bush or a hashmalam in the case of the Mount Sinai thing, or a giant water spout, which fucking murders people, which is something he very much likes to do. And also, the god of Exodus is not really tolerant towards polytheism, unlike this god, who has not really said anything to the contrary just yet. And this may be skipping ahead a little bit, but once we get to Genesis 20, something is said which is rather interesting. But put a pin in that one for later. I know I say that a lot, but it'll come up again frequently. Not frequently, but it's just something to remember. 18:2. And he lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, 3 men stood over against him. And when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door, and bowed himself to the earth, and said, My Lord, if now I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away, I pray thee, from thy servants. Look at this. This is so nice. Let now a little water be fetched, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will fetch a morsel of bread, and strengthen ye your heart. After that ye shall pass on, forasmuch as ye are come to your servant. And they said, So do as thou hast said. And Abraham hastened, into the tent unto Sarah, and said, Make ready quickly 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes. And Abraham ran out unto the herd, and fetched a calf tender and good, and gave it unto the servant, and he hastened to dress it. And he took butter and milk, and the calf which he had dressed, and set it before them, and stood by them under the tree. And they did eat. So this is kind of a note which is repeating itself, kind of not. In my video on the classification of angels, I mentioned in the traditional art sanctioned by the church, angels were allowed to be depicted with long hair and short and, sort of like soft facial features, but they weren't allowed to be depicted with breasts or facial hair or anything that would denominate some sort of gender identity onto them. The belief goes that angels are perfect, divine beings, and all sorts of reproductive organs or digestive functions are beneath them. I did not cite this passage specifically, though it does illustrate my point. There is no reason for the angels, much less a god, to be sitting around eating the food of mortals. And if you were wondering, though, I checked the original Hebrew, and men is the most accurate translation for Jehovah and company, as the word used here is anisim, used throughout the Pentateuch to describe all manner of men, not just divine figures. So I thought that was a little bit interesting to bring up, that as of right now, it doesn't really make too much of a difference, but there is a distinction being drawn. And we'll see later on in Genesis 19, they actually do start using different titles for these figures, which are a little bit more appropriate, but we'll get to that when we do. So the rest of 18 is actually pretty bare. This is just one that I'm gonna try and speed read through. Trust me, we're gonna get held up at every fucking point in 19, so there'll be notes abound for that one. Anyway, 18:9. And they said unto him, Where is Sarah thy wife? And he said, Behold, in the tent. And he said, I will certainly return unto thee when the season cometh round, and lo, Sarah thy wife shall have a son. And Sarah heard in the tent door which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, and well stricken in age. It had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. Essentially, it just means that she's too old to reproduce. And Sarah laughed within herself, saying, After I am waxed old, shall I have pleasure, my lord, being old also? And Jehovah said unto Abraham, Wherefore did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I of surety bear a child who am old? Is anything too hard for Jehovah? At the set time I will return to thee, when the season cometh round, and Sarah shall have a son. Essentially, they're just kind of repeating the exchange that happened between Abraham and God in Genesis 17, where he made the same prophecy to him before, and Abraham essentially had the same reaction. He started laughing, and God was just like, "Shut the fuck up! I'm God. I can literally do whatever the hell I want, and you're gonna have a second kid." And that's when he prophesied, "His name shall be Isaac, he who laughs." And as I kind of stated before, it's kind of more or less meant to be a slight against Abraham and I almost said Sarai. It's Sarah at this point. Uh, just like, "Oh, okay, you're gonna doubt me? Well, guess what? Now your son will forever bear the mark of your doubt. You stupid fucking." I I I, I really hate Abraham, and I'm hoping that later on, this chapter in particular will demonstrate that God's kind of starting to get tired of his shit too. Anyway, 1815. Then Sarah denied, saying, "I laughed not, for she was afraid." And he said, "Nay, but thou didst laugh, bitch." I added the bitch there, but I thought it was appropriate. And the men rose up from thence and looked towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them to bring them on the way. Let me scroll down here. And Jehovah said, "Shall I hide from Abraham that which I do, seeing that Abraham had surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of earth shall be blessed in him?" I mean, he built a fucking tent city up to this point, but yeah, sure, it's a great and mighty nation. "For I have known him, to the end that he may command his children and his household after him, that they may keep the way of Jehovah, to do righteousness and justice, to the end that Jehovah may bring upon Abraham that which he hath spoken of him." And Jehovah said, "Because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now, and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which is come unto thee. And if not, I will know." And the men turned from thence, and went toward Sodom. But Abraham stood yet before Jehovah. And Abraham drew near, and said, "Wilt thou consume the righteous with the wicked? Peradventure there are 50 righteous within the city. Wilt thou consume and not spare the place for the 50 righteous that are there in? God, fuck, biblical language is very hard to read. "That be far from thee to do after this manner, to slay the righteous with the wicked, that so the righteous should be as the wicked. That be far from thee. Shall not judge all of the earth do right." And Jehovah said, "If I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare all the place for their sake." And Abraham answered and said, "Behold now, I have taken upon me to speak unto the Lord, who am but dust and ashes. Peradventure there shall lack 5 of the 50 righteous. Wilt thou destroy all the city for a lack of 5? And he said, "I will not destroy it, if I find there are 45. And now Abraham's going to start pressing his luck. "And he spake unto him yet again, and said, Peradventure there shall be 40 found there. And he said, I will not do it for 40's sake. And he said, Oh, let the Lord not be angry, and I will speak. Peradventure there shall be 30 found there. And he said, I will not do it if I find 30 there. And he said, Behold now, I have taken upon me to speak unto the Lord. Peradventure there shall be 20 found there. And he said, Oh my God, I will not destroy it for 20's sake. Okay, happy? And he said, Okay, Lord, don't be angry, and I will speak yet but this once. Peradventure 10 shall be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for 10's sake. And Jehovah went on his way as soon as he had left off communing with Abraham, and Abraham returned unto his place. I find it funny that not only Abraham continues to push his luck by effectively haggling with God over the conditions of genocide, but then this passage explicitly states, as soon as he had left off communing with Abraham, essentially just saying he got tired of his shit and just left. For those of you who have never read these chapters, you are in for a treat. And it all starts with that one. So anyway, that was Genesis 18. Like I said, not too much to really cover. The first part of the chapter is really just repeating things that were already stated in Genesis 17. And then the later part of the chapter is more or less just God effectively revealing his plan. So with all that being said, Salem says, isn't it interesting that despite the strict gender roles in early Christian cultures, that angels are gender neutral despite being above humans? I've definitely always said that it's not necessarily the case that they're gender neutral within the Bible. It's just some weird sort of like medieval doctrine against the depiction of angels in art. They have changed it since then. You can be commissioned by the Vatican, and you can paint something where like there's like an angel with a full ass beard or something like that anymore. But I don't necessarily think it's really interesting so much as it's like trying to draw a line between the divinity of angels and the mortal conceptions of man, if that makes sense. It probably doesn't. I don't know. I'm very tired. Okay, so if nobody has any real questions about Genesis 18, we will move swiftly along to what is the most marked up chapter in the entirety of my PDF of the Bible, Genesis 19. This is the one where I actually learned that there are character limits to comments. So there is a specific section here where there's like 3 note boxes to try and explain some things, mostly my crackpot theory, which is not really crackpot. I think it's very sound, especially compared to everything else that has been presented. So in any case, let me go ahead here, share the screen. Oh, there it is. That was weird. Sorry, I forgot to scroll forward, and let us begin with 19:1. And the 2 angels came to Sodom at even, and Lot sat at the gate of Sodom. And Lot saw them, and rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. So I have a note here about 2 angels specifically being, the word used. You remember the previous chapter, they referred to the angels as well as God as merely men. And now the word has changed a little bit. The traditional Hebrew used is ham-malakim, or just malak, which is a word tied to the angels, but it is derived from an older word which kind of just means messenger. hence why a distinction is drawn between these angels and the cherubim mentioned as being posted on guard duty outside of Eden in Genesis 3. And by the way, what you find if you look into cherub, as mentioned in that passage of the Bible, is a connection to an Assyrian creature, Keribu, another name for the Lamassu, a protectorate spirits in the Assyrian folk religion. Another possibility, interestingly enough, is that it may be connected to a caribou, which is a statue of some other form of divine representation, which was meant to pass on messages from those who prayed to them towards their gods, giving us a connection to that whole messenger or malak aspect. Again, this is kind of something I touched up on in the angelology explained video. If I have time and sanity left after this, I'll go ahead and I'll post the link to that probably just in the description. I won't probably be able to find the specific timestamp to put a little iCard in the right hand corner, but definitely check that out if you haven't seen it before. I would say it's probably essential viewing if you really want to get into the nitty gritty of what an angel really is, especially in the context of this section of the Bible. All right, so let us move along. And he said, "Behold now, my lords, turn aside, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet, and ye shall rise up early and go on your way. And they said, Nay, but we will abide in the street all night. And he urged them greatly, and they turned in unto him, and entered into his house. And he made them a feast, and did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat." There's that whole thing again about, angels actually do need a digestive system, and, likewise an anus to shit out of. "But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house around, both young and old, all the people from every quarter. And they said unto Lot, and said unto him, Where are the men that came in to thee this night? Bring them out to us, that we may know them." Okay, so we're entering into some more controversial territory. And the reason that I use this version of the Bible is because it is mostly accurate to the original Hebrew Pentateuch. So the words used here are wane dana. And this is the only case in which this word comes up in the Bible, and it is used to imply a more malicious intention. Typically, whenever it is used in such a way, it's so that we may learn, or that we may know the word of God, etc., etc. Now, some translations use words like carnally or intimately in parentheses right after, so that we may know them, while others just straight up say, so we can fuck them, or so that we may have sex with them, or they take a little bit more liberties with their translation. Given what is about to happen in the following passages, I'd say that this view is appropriate, though it is still worth considering, as we have already touched on. Sodom means something akin to inhospitality rather than gay butt sex. Spoiler alert, by the way, God ends up destroying Sodom, and Lot, his wife, and 2 daughters only account for 4 of the 10 needed to spare the city. Another spoiler alert, this is the only time someone has been subject to capital punishment, as far as we know, for the crime of homosexuality in the Jewish faith. Now, very liberal interpretations of the Torah, specifically Leviticus, state that the whole putting someone to death bit only applies to the act of sodomy and does not specifically condemn homosexuality itself. Kind of seems like an argumentative loophole, especially considering what else, pray tell, would be the end goal of a homosexual relationship, but I digress. However, there are some pretty steep conditions to this rule. A, no one under 13 can be put to death for any reason under Jewish law. Not that I think a 12-year-old could consent to any sort of sexual act in the first place, but it bears mentioning. B, you need to have hard proof for a conviction, meaning that you explicitly have to be caught in the act, seen by at least 2 witnesses, and if you were not forewarned about it immediately, they are required to tell you to stop it and that it is morally incorrect. And you need to keep on doing it anyway, now with an audience of at least 2 people. And then the 2 witnesses would need to go to the magistrate, go through the whole rigmarole, and then you can finally put the guy to death. And you may have noticed something in that description there. There is a loophole. If you were to get caught, and then you are verbally warned not to engage in sodomy, you can just kind of shrug your shoulders and say, oh, my be, and then just put your pants back on and be golden. Oh, and I guess it also bears mentioning that lesbian relationships are not specifically prohibited by the Bible. Later rabbinic literature discusses it and whether or not it erases a woman's virginity, in which case the worst thing that can possibly happen to her is that she can't become a priest anymore. And the most condemning piece of rabbinic law recommends, that the parties be lashed rather than put to death explicitly. So there you go, ladies. No express elevators for you. I probably went a little too far in my explanation here. I probably should have waited until Leviticus, but it's fresh on my mind, and we're probably going to tear apart everything having to do with Leviticus and Deuteronomy when we do eventually get to those books. But that is my footnote on, what was that, 5 words that I highlighted? Welcome to Bible Book by Book, ladies and gentlemen. 19:6, and Lot went out unto them to the door and shut the door after him. And he said, I pray you, my brethren, do not so wickedly. And here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Genesis 19:8, what is considered to be possibly the second most fucked up verse in the entire Bible. Behold now, I have 2 daughters that have not known man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do ye to them as is good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing, for as much as they are come under the shadow of my roof. So a good argument, as I said, can be made for this full stop just being the worst thing that any pious, quote unquote, man has ever done. So naturally, we need to examine this one a little bit further. I've seen some contention that Lot did not know that the guests of his house were angels of the Lord, and he was just doing this to fit into that whole stereotype of Middle Eastern hospitality to an almost satirical extent. However, I know for a fact that he did know that these 2 were angels, as when he first greets them at the gates of Sodom, he calls them my lords, and even bows to them and refers to himself as their servant. This actually makes Lot's offer worse, because if you consider this, That means that he is willing to throw his own daughters to the dogs because he is afraid of the ramifications of allowing God's angels to be violated, and he is explicitly trying to save his own skin. The very best counter argument apologists could come up to try and excuse his behavior is that Lot was merely bluffing and that he was just trying to make a point and highlight exactly how ridiculous the Sodomites were by demanding the angels' butts. Here's my retort. We've seen rhetoric in the Bible before, and if that were the case, Lot would have said something to the effect of, "Would you have me give up my 2 virgin daughters to satisfy your voracious sexual appetite in their stead? Away with you now, and shame be upon you for making such a ridiculous request. These are my guests." That's kind of how it would have been worded if it was meant to be rhetorical. Of course, it's not. This is. Oh, man. Would you believe me if I said that this is only probably the second most fucked up thing in this chapter that happens, specifically concerning Lot and his 2 daughters? We're about to get into that. It's right at the very tail end of this chapter, but whew, boy. I know some of you have expressed to me before, like, "Oh yeah, I've never read the Bible," or like I only know what they teach you in Sunday school. Well, they don't teach you this in Sunday school. Either that, or you just have a really fucked up Sunday school. And of course, we get to the next passage, and I already have another lengthy note, but let's read that first. 19:9, and they said, "Stand back." And they said, "This one fellow came in to sojourn, and he needs to be a judge. Now will we deal worse with thee than with them. Excuse me. And they pressed sore upon the man, even Lot, and drew near to break the door." So this was a little bit of a word salad and a bit difficult, at least for me, to understand upon first reading. So essentially, what happens is that the Sodomites are telling Lot that he is a sojourner in their land, and as thus, he should already know their laws and culture. By defending these guests, he has effectively cockblocked them. And in doing so, he is about to get the same rapey treatment, only worse now because he aggravated them. If you need a more simple to understand reading of this passage. "Look here, boy, this is Sodomite country, and I reckon even a wetback like you ought to know by now that we here like to play baseball with each other's anuses, if you catch my drift. So step aside, Padre, or get ready to bite that there pillow." Something kind of like that. And as fucked up as it may sound, they do kind of have a point. Lot has been established to be quite wealthy as of this point, holding a great many flocks, slaves, and what have you. If he found the culture of Sodom so irrehensible, why would he even stay there? He should have known that the most Middle East, he should have known that the majority of Middle Eastern city-states of that time really had a lot of acceptance towards homosexuality, and sexual depravity was found in abundance, especially in Uruk. By continuing to live there year after year, all he was really doing was exposing himself and his family to Sodom's influence. A righteous man indeed. By the way, I'm not taking the side of the Sodomites here. What they're advocating for is essentially rape, and that's no bueno in my book. I'm simply highlighting the fact that if Lot objects so much to their demands on the grounds of morality, he's a hypocrite for staying there so long. But if he's really just okay with the culture and even willing to marry off some of his children to them, then he should know better than to try and assuage their lust with fresh, probably underage, pussy. Moving along to 1910. I actually don't have notes for a fair stretch. Don't worry, we'll we'll get into it. But the men put forth their hand and brought Lot into the house to them, and shut to the door. And they smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves to find the door. And the men said unto Lot, by the way, you notice they changed angels back to men here. Very interesting. Hast thou here any besides, son-in-law, and thy sons and thy daughters, and whomsoever thou hast in the city, bring them out of the place. For we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxed great before Jehovah, and Jehovah hath sent us to destroy it. Blech. And Lot went out and spake unto his sons-in-law, who married his daughters, and said, Up, get you from this place, for Jehovah will destroy the city. But he seemed unto his sons-in-law as one that mocked, which is totally fair. They have absolutely no reason to believe him. And in any case, they probably should already know about like the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah, because it said that men from all corners of the city had gathered around Lot's house when they were initially demanding the gay butt sex, which should follow that the sons-in-law that he had, who married presumably his older daughters, probably should have known about that. But we'll sweep that under the rug for right now. That's not a huge deal. And when the morning arose, then the angels hastened Lot, saying, Arise, take thy wife and thy two daughters that are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. There. But he lingered, and the men laid hold upon his land, and upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of his two daughters, Jehovah being merciful unto him. And they brought him forth and set him without the city. Okay. So Lot and his immediate family are dragged out by force because he's being an indecisive little shits. Apparently, the mercy expressed by Jehovah's angels unto his son-in-law was a one-time thing, despite the fact that they didn't really witness what Lot did and were rightfully speculative about the whole friggin' city being nuked. Also, it said that Lot lingered. So something was tying him to the city, and despite the fact that he knew it was about to get nuked, he's just like, well, you know what? This is just a really nice place to live. You know, the neighbors are a little bit rapey, but, you know, there's no income tax. They keep the plants well tenured and stuff like that. I don't know, guys. And so they just essentially drag him out by force. And all I can say is, fair enough. Okay, so 1917, and I apologize for the obnoxiously large page breaks in this PDF. And it came to pass, when they had brought them forth abroad, that he said, Escape for thy life, look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plain, escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed. And Lot said unto them, Oh, not so, my lord. Behold now, thy servant hath found favor in thy sight, and thou hast magnified thy loving kindness, which thou hast shown unto me in saving my life. And I cannot escape to the mountain, lest evil overtake me and I die. It's odd that Lot would say this following God's warning of what is effectively genocide. His complaint essentially amounts to, I can't flee into the mountains. What if I get mauled by a mountain lion or something? So he's about to bargain for another city, essentially, to stay in. 1920. Behold now, this city is near to flee unto, and it is a little one. Oh, let me escape thither. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live. And he said unto them, See, I have accepted thee concerning this thing also, that I will not overthrow the city of which thou hast spoken. Haste thee, escape thither, for I cannot do anything till thou have become thither. Therefore, the name of the city was called Zoar. For those of you who watched last episode, you'll remember that there were 5 city-states aligned with each other. Sodom, Gomorrah, Bizoim, Admah, and Zoar, I believe. The 2 in between there are a little bit contentious, but with my memory, I do have it in notes here, but I want to specifically point out, therefore, the name of the city was called Zoar. So put a pin in the fact that Lot specifically asked God to spare this city. It'll tie into a theory I have to share with all of you a little bit later. In the meantime, the etymology of Zoar is based on the Hebrew word sa'ar, meaning to be small or otherwise insignificant, highlighting the fact that the city was apparently too small for God to bother nuking from orbit. It's also interesting, as it established a precedent wherein wherein all of the cities, which were about to be destroyed, got their names around the same time as the cataclysm took place, meaning that Sodom and Gomorrah specifically were likely not originally named after inhospitality and tyranny. But, I mean, that's kind of to be expected. Okay, so 1923. We're about to get into the big notes. The sun was risen upon the earth when Lot came unto Zoar. Then Jehovah rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah, for some reason, brimstone and fire from Jehovah out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities, and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. Ignore 1926 right now. I more or less want to make some notes on 1924 and 25. So, following these 2 passages, I suppose there are 3 obvious questions to answer here, and these will primarily take up the majority of our presentation today. So, the questions are: A, are there any extra-biblical mentions of Sodom and Gomorrah, such as historical records, for us to ascertain whether or not these cities even existed in the first place? B, if these places are thought to have existed, what could have practically caused their destruction? The Pentateuch is historical, and I'm not about to dispute that, but it's history bastardized by religious dogma, and there is almost certainly a more reasonable explanation to these occurrences. And C, why did God feel the need to destroy not only Gomorrah, but the other 2 cities of the plains, Admah and Zeboim? I think I actually did get that right. Yay! When it was Sodom and its inhabitants that were truly poking the bear with, their penises poking buttholes. Well, to answer the first question, yes and no. So the Greek writer Strabo makes mention of the lands around what is known in that day as Moasada, and a local legend permeated by the population. Many other evidences are produced to show that the country is fiery, for near Moasada there are to be seen rugged rocks that have been scorched, as also in many places fissures and ashy soil, and drops of pitch that emit foul odors to a great distance, and ruined settlements here and there. And therefore people believe the oft-repeated assertions of the local inhabitants that there were once 13 inhabited cities in the region, of which Sodom was the metropolis. Metropolis. I don't know how to pronounce that word, actually. But that a city of about 60 stadia of that city escaped unharmed. As for the cities, some were swallowed up, and others were abandoned by such as were able to escape. But Eratosthenes, I apologize if I am butchering that name, says, on the contrary, that the country was a lake, and that most of it was uncovered by outbreaks, as was the case with the sea. End quote. So put a pin in that. We're going to be coming back to that later. Much more venomously, the Greek philosopher and early redditor Celsus actually accused the Christians of appropriating his own culture as their own. More specifically, the story of Phaethon, stating that if the city were to have been miraculously destroyed in a fire from the sky, then it must have come from his own folklore, because obviously, as a Greek ethnocentralist, everything Greek is just superior. And the third mention that I was actually able to find was an old Akkadian legend from the Records of the Past, being a clay tablet translated via Archibald Sayes in 1889, which reads as follows. An overthrow from the mists of the deep, too there came. The fated punishments from the midst of heaven hath descended. A storm like a punishment the earth overwhelmed. To the four winds the destroying flood did like fire did burn. The inhabitants of the cities it had caused to be tormented. Their bodies it consumed. In the city and country it spread death, and the flames as they rose overthrew freemen and slave were equal, and the high places it filled. In heaven and earth like a thunderstorm it had rained, a prey it made, a place of refuge the gods hastened to, and in a throng collected. Its mighty onset they fled from, and like a garment it concealed mankind. They feared the death overtook them. Their feet and hands it embraced. Tablet cracked. Most of the poem is lost from here. And then it picks up. Their body it consumed. The city, its foundations it denied. In breath his mouth he filled. As for this man, a loud voice was raised. The mighty lightning flash descended. During the day it flashed, grievously it fell. And that's essentially where it ends. Now, it's important to note here that Say's positively, like, no doubt in his mind, identifies the two cities that were destroyed in this poem as Sodom and Gomorrah, though this was never explicitly stated, and even by the biblical record, 4 cities were destroyed, and if Strabo's account is to be historically accurate, then there were 13 such cities. This then begs the question as to how the city, practically again, was destroyed. Excuse me, real quick, I'm going to take a swig because I've been talking very ad nauseum nonstop. Lubricate the pipes a little bit. Okay, so a modern theory was published in 2017 by the Comet Research Group, and it claims just that. A meteor struck the city of Tal el-Hammam, which does show evidence of the site being destroyed in a fire, though is curiously absent of any sort of crater, making the claim that the meteor or comet burned up in Earth's upper atmosphere and the resulting air burst was what actually destroyed the city. However, there are a few problems with this hypothesis. First off, no archaeologists who have studied any of the ancient cities in Jordan have found any sorts of evidence to suggest that the site of Tal el Hammam is really the same thing as Sodom, and instead propose completely different archaeological sites. Then we get into some of the more nefarious practices of the Comet Research Group, who eventually admitted to fabricating evidence via image manipulation. They also withheld their evidence from other researchers, and the site and actually had cited some incredibly biased sources as to the historicity of the explosion by young Earth creationists. In fact, as recently as this year, the paper included the following editor's note. Readers are alerted that concerns raised about the data presented and the conclusions of this article are being considered by the editors. A further editorial response will follow the resolution of these issues. End quote. Which is really just a polite PC way of saying, we got caught, but we're going to drag this out as long as humanly possible and hope that the incredibly fringe audience for this paper, that includes myself and now all of you, loses interest so that we can hopefully save face and continue to perpetuate our lies. Okay, so now let's take a look at other possibilities, since that one's pretty effectively ruled out. Another obvious one is a volcanic eruption. This is plausible, however, the location of Sodom and Gomorrah would have had to have been moved out of the Dead Sea area and more into southern Syria, as this is the closest area with any sort of volcanic activity which was detected around the time of their destruction. This is fine. Realistically, the early Jewish writers would have had to have just taken some other fantastic story of a city's destruction and just move it southward. But I can definitely see if you want to argue that this is a weak point, seeing as the area of Sodom and Gomorrah were explicitly spelled out as being in the plains of Jordan neighboring Canaan. And so the account given to us by Strabo and also by the account of Strabo at a later date. So the third possibility is an earthquake. And there is evidence of seismic activity taking place around the Dead Sea, resulting in an ancient earthquake measuring in at about a 6 on the Richter scale today, more than enough to topple Bronze Age architecture, though that's nowhere near enough to have completely erased their ruins, as is the case with all 4 cities of the plain. For that, we would have to accept the possibility of the earthquake resulting in a subsequent landslide from Mount Sodom. This is entirely plausible, as the city would have had to have almost certainly been constructed as close as possible to the Dead Sea and its surrounding groundwater, as there is evidence that the early Bronze Age Egyptians traded with these peoples, specifically for momia, a type of asphalt which is found at the bottom of the sea, which is used for embalming. Hence, we now have the name mummy. Now, an obvious issue with this theory is there is an abject lack of any sort of fire or brimstone involved, which could be written off as merely an added detail for dramatic effect by the Hebrew legend, though this same detail is present in the Akkadian poem. And given how striking and prominent the fire is, it seems like something which would be integrated into the story itself right from the get-go. And that leads us to our last and my personal favorite theory. The armies of the 4 city-states came back after their embarrassing loss to Abraham, ransacked Sodom, Gomorrah, Zeboim, and Admah, and then burned down their remains to ashes. After all, if we go back to Genesis 14 for a sec, they clearly possess the military might to be able to crush their opposition. Let me just read a quick little excerpt just to remind some of you from last episode. Now the vale of Sodom was full of slime pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and they fell there. And they that remained fled to the mountain, and they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah, and all their victuals, and went their way. And they took Lot, Abraham's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. That is from Genesis 14:10 to 14:12, if anybody wants to bother being so anal retentive as to try and cross-reference me. Now, remember, Abraham didn't destroy this whole confederation. He only drove him away for the time. It's entirely within the realm of possibility that they could have regrouped, came back, and laid siege to the cities on the plain, possibly even shooting some flaming arrows or having some heavy incendiaries flung over the walls via trebuchets or some shit like that. It would provide a reasonable explanation as to why all 4 cities were destroyed, and it would have had to have been done in a really big... And realistically, it would have had to have been a really big volcanic eruption or a really big landslide to cover over all of these places, each of which was conveniently waging war against Tidal & Co. So, a question that I don't see speculated upon quite so much is as to why God destroyed Gomorrah, Zeboim, and Admah when it was really only Sodom who screwed the pooch here by attempting to violate God's angels. As we discussed in part 4, Sodom and Gomorrah have names relating to a specific sin, depending on how they are interpreted. But the other 2 are seemingly innocent here. I would argue that all this really does is feed into my theory that the cities were destroyed by the Confederation, and that's what I'm calling them, fuck off. And by the time that they got into Zoar, their resources were a bit too exhausted to go any further. Now, some of you might try to contest me by saying, well, why would they burn the cities instead of just ransacking them? To which I would remind you that they already did this back in Genesis 14. So they likely still had the lion's share of the treasures from these places. And also, there's really nothing to suggest that they didn't prior to burning them down either. As is clearly stated here in the Bible, this is all being attributed to the wrath of God, and not any sort of natural occurrence, or especially not enemy action. We'll come back to this theory of foreign invaders in just a little bit. But as of right now, we have some more fish to fry, namely in the very next passage. So, with all of that being said, we move swiftly along to Genesis 19:26 and the resulting consequences of the angel's warning to not look back. But his wife looked back and from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. Remember how I had you all put a pin in that don't look back at Sodom line earlier in this chapter? Well, now the consequences are coming out in full display. There are believed to be 2 influences on this part of the story. The first being of Orpheus and Eurydice. I don't think I should have to recount this story as it's one of the most famous Greek myths, but here we go. So Apollo's son Orpheus is like really, really good at music. And he had a knife named Eurydice who got bitten by a snake or battered to death by some overly horny shepherd, depending on the version of the myth that you read. Orpheus is so distraught at her loss that he heads down to the underworld and seeks an audience with the objective best Greek god and his wife Persephone. He plays a song for them, and it is so beautiful. And this causes Persephone to beg and nag the Hades to the point where he allows for him to return to this mortal world with Eurydice's soul following him, but on the strict condition that he cannot turn around and check and see if she is actually still following him. So, as it happens, he walks all the way up until he's almost out of the underworld, until he loses his nerve and at the very last second turns around to check and see if she's still there. And she is. But then she gets sucked right back into Hades. The underworld, not into the god Hades' ass. The lesson that we can try to impart from this whole text isn't really that hard to glean. Orpheus is going through all of Hades and not checking up on his wife is supposed to be some sort of test of his faith in the words of the gods. Likewise, Lot's wife was supposed to go out of Sodom and never turn back and trust in the words of El Shaddai. Yes, I'm still calling him that. Though what, pray tell, she was supposed to have faith in is entirely unclear. Is it the fact that there is a city engulfing bonfire going on behind her? Because, I mean, that's pretty obvious even if you are facing the completely opposite direction. In any case, it might surprise some of you to know that this myth is actually based on a real geological feature found atop Mount Sodom, nicknamed Lot's wife, after this passage in the Bible. And yes, it is in fact made entirely of salt. Though clearly Jay was no geologist, as the entirety of Mount Sodom is pretty much comprised of salt and is a major factor in the saline levels of the Dead Sea. Even still, I think it's pretty neat that they tied this into a real-world geographical feature. All right. So we're going to continue on here. We have 2 more notes for Genesis 19. I promise I will answer everybody's questions. Kind of look back through the comments. I do know that this has taken a little bit of time, and I do apologize for that, but there is just a lot of things that I wanted to get out of the way in terms of explanations for, where is Sodom and Gomorrah, what really destroyed them, etc., etc. And so I appreciate your patience. Genesis 19:27. And Abraham gat up early in the morning to the place where he had stood before Jehovah. And he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the plain, and beheld, and lo, the smoke of the land went up as the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham, and sent Lot out to the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot dwelt. Basically just kind of summarizing everything that just happened. And Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountain, and his 2 daughters with him, for he feared to dwell in Zoar, as he dwelt in the cave, he and his 2 daughters. Okay, so once again, this kind of reaffirms my theory that Sodom and Gomorrah were sacked by enemy invaders. Why else would Lot be afraid to dwell in the city which God specifically had agreed to him to leave alone? Unless the practical explanation is that Zoar would logically be the next on the Confederacy's chopping block, and so he just wants to get out of Dodge and flee into the mountains, like he refuses to do earlier. And well, actually, like the refugees of Sodom did earlier back in Genesis 14, but whatever. There are spots in the Bible which don't make a lot of sense, and this is clearly one of them. So I kind of am forced to pick things apart with my overly autistic munchy brain. And so as I'm thinking all this over, I'm just like, yeah, you know what? practically speaking, it was probably just one big weekend where everybody from the Confederation of the Northern States were just like, yeah, you remember those cities of the plains and Abraham, those guys who kind of fucked us last time? Let's go back and fuck them again. All right, somebody's mowing outside, and I apologize if you can hear that. But we're almost done with 19, I promise. 1931. And the firstborn said unto the younger, Our father is old, and there is not a man in the earth to come in unto us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve seed of our father. And they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he knew not when she lay down, nor when she arose. Can you fuck off, please? And it came to pass on the morrow that the firstborn said unto the younger, Behold, I lay yesternight with my father. Let us make him drink wine this night also, and go thou in and lie with him, that we may preserve the seed of our father. And they made their father drink wine that night also. And the younger arose and lay with him, and he knew not when she lay down, nor when she arose. Thus were both the daughters of Lot with child by their own father. And the firstborn bare a son, and called his name Moab. The same is the father of the Moabites unto this day. And the younger, she also bare a son, and called his name Ben-Ami, the same as is the father of the children of Ammon unto this day. So, what you have just bore witness to is almost universally recognized as the most fucked up story of the entire Bible. Would you believe that this creepy electro-complex fantasy actually has a purpose in the wider world of Israel? As I've already established, the Israelites didn't really like their neighbors. Any of them, really. From the Egyptians, to the Canaanites, to the Chaldeans, Assyrians, and so on and so forth, until eventually we get to the Romans. The Moabites and Ammonites are no exception. This is more or less a satirical retelling of their supposed origins. It's a little jarring that they would slap on an incest joke to the tail end of a chapter all about genocide, but, I mean, I didn't write this shit, so... Stop sharing here for just 1 second. We'll go ahead and address the chat real quickly. I know I missed a few comments here from all of you, so I'll go ahead and try and get to all of them. As laws go, pretty forgiving. I assume that comment was made in reference to the whole specifics of homosexuality. Like I said, there's no historical record of anybody actually being put to death for being gay in, traditional Judaism. Now later on, with the advent of Christianity and Islam, they got to be a little bit more strict with how they enforce that very specific law. So you do see a lot more of executions taking place for that very specific crime. Sir Adamantine, Messiah with an exclamation point. Sir Adamantine with an exclamation point. Offering daughters. Yikes, I'd be dialing child services or 911 at this point. Well, I'd like to remind you that neither one of those exist at this point, unfortunately. Um, yeah, that the whole, like I said, Genesis 19 is really just a massive blemish for anyone trying to feign morality and, citing the Bible as a source of it. It's really hard to try and explain away. And this one, and, the whole Lot sleeping with his own daughters and everything else really is just anybody who reads into it with a little bit more of a speculative mind will find that there's a very good reason why this was cut from Sunday school curriculum. In fact, just recently, as kind of a little bit of research for this topic, I did go back and I watched the Dark Matter 2525 cartoon that he did on Sodom and Gomorrah, which is about like 10 years old by this point. As far as like the grand scheme of like edgy atheist YouTube content from back in the day, it's fine for the most part. It does get to be a little bit obnoxious kind of towards the end there when the daughters of Lot are like talking about like, the plot to like sleep with him, and then like he just kind of holds on to a joke which wasn't funny in the first place and just kind of like keeps going with it. Like, I understand like repetition is one of the integral points of comedy. I do it all the time in my own videos, but like I don't sit there with like this incredibly long diatribe trying to make something work that's admittedly not very funny to begin with, or at least I try to. And also at the very end of that cartoon, which is very weird, he has like this whole thing where like Abraham meets Lot, and apparently they're meeting each other for the first time. I guess like he just didn't know that Lot was actually Abraham's nephew, and that he even lived with him for a time. So that was a little bit jarring. I don't know if it's just a case that he only read a few passages from 18 and 19 and didn't bother with the rest of Genesis before that point. But yeah, it's a little bit jarring. Maybe he made that point to, kind of sacrificed biblical accuracy for the sake of a joke, but like I said, it's poorly aged and it's about 10 years old by this point, but whatever. Let's see here. Would they even have genitals? Why offer the daughter? Well, the men of Sodom definitely have genitals. That I don't understand why he would offer them to the angels in that case. But yeah, if there is any clarity that needs to be brought to that, Lot was offering his daughters to the men of Sodom who were circling around his house. P. Mantia, by the way, welcome. Him staying there just adds to the moral ambiguity of Lot. He only moved away when he was compelled to. He's supposed to represent how even good men can be corrupted, but he's still cringe. Yeah, totally agree. Like I said, I obviously don't agree with, the whole rapey bits of the Bible up to this point, but at the same time, I definitely do see where the Sodomites were coming from when they pointed out that, like, Lot essentially brought all of this onto himself. He willingly stayed in the city. He probably witnessed quite a bit of sodomy while he was there, but apparently it just never bothered him up until this point. Did God vanquish them all just out of association with one another then? That's kind of assumed. Like I said, Sodom is really the only offender here in God's eyes. I don't understand why the other three needed to be destroyed, but it's never explicitly spelled out. And spoiler alert, the Bible never touches up on it again and really, provides more detail on the whole thing. So it's kind of left up to our own imaginations. Like I said, I cite the whole thing where Lot flees into Zoar and then he says that he's afraid to stay there as kind of more or less he saw the invasion coming. He got out of Dodge. Sodom was destroyed. Gomorrah was destroyed. Zeboim was destroyed, so on and so forth. And as he's staying in Zoar, then he is just like, oh man, I better get out of here too. And so he ends up in the mountains. What's interesting is that last part about the sperm stealing isn't found in the Quran. So I'll just kind of fucking spoil things for you. I haven't really read the Quran, and I don't know what really has been changed around. I can't say that. I have read Genesis, like the first few chapters of the Quran, and then they do explicitly add Satan in as a character by that point. But I have not read up on the Quran's variation of this story. So we will eventually, big emphasis on eventually, get to that. Bubblegum Gum. First female grapist. I assume you meant to say rapist. It's okay. I don't care about making this channel family friendly, but yes, I do believe that this is in fact the first instance of female rape in the Bible. Is it the last? I don't think so either. But we will come to that bridge, or cross that bridge when we come to it, rather. And again, I want to thank you all for tuning in. I know we're kind of starting to lose the attention of people. I did carry on quite a bit with chapter 19, just because there was a lot of things to note. But that's why this episode is a little bit shorter. We only got one more chapter to go over, Genesis 20, which is actually a pretty short chapter. I do have a lot of notes, but it's only about 18 or 19 passages long, I think. Yeah, 18 passages. So we'll try and get through this one as quick as humanly possible. So let me go ahead here, get the banner on, go ahead and present my screen. Okay, so Genesis 20, verse 1. And Abraham journeyed from thence toward the land of the south, and dwelt between Kadesh and Shur, and he sojourned in Gerar. As to why, your guess is as good as mine. Abraham went down to Egypt back in, what was that? Genesis 14. No, 12. Excuse me. Yeah, he went down to Egypt because it was said that he had some sort of famine going on in the land in Canaan. So it made sense for him to leave that at that point. But this entire section of the Bible is kind of filler. And I propose that he did this intentionally to con the king of Gerar out of his valuables, since it worked so well the last time for him, if you remember back to our previous episode. Also, it should go without saying by this point, but the city was almost certainly not called Gerar, as that name means dragging or sojourning in Hebrew. So it's essentially saying that the city was named after the fact that Abraham visited it once, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Again, they're just using the names most familiar to the Hebrews at the time, so give them a little bit of a pass. Don't be overly pedantic about the whole damn thing. 22. And Abraham said to Sarah his wife, "She is my sister." And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. Now, how in the fuck did this actually work this time? At least when they were in Egypt, Sarah, or Sarai, I guess, at that point, was still fairly young. Here, she's some 90-year-old woman who's also just so happens to be pregnant, given the placement of this chapter. That is, assuming that this chapter wasn't misplaced upon the gathering and sorting of all the books of the Bible. Like I said before, this is really just kind of a filler chapter, and there is no mention of Ishmael or Isaac or Hagar or anything of the like. So it's entirely possible that this was meant to take place between Genesis 12 and 13, but they kind of got their wires crossed. The only thing that I can really think of to kind of disprove this theory is that they are actually going by the names Abraham and Sarah as opposed to Abram and Sarai, which that just kind of calls into question the whole validity of this chapter, because why would Abimelech take a 90-year-old woman who has a baby bump to be his wife? 23. But God came to Abimelech in the dream of the night, and said unto him, Behold, thou art but a dead man, because of the woman whom thou hast taken, for she is a man's wife. Quick note on Abimelech, his name means my father is king, which implies that at this time he was merely the crowned prince of Gerar, though that could just be said to be his birth name. Though I don't personally think that, once your father dies, you should... I personally think that when your father dies and you usurp the throne, you kind of graduate into a more dignified name than just merely, I live in the shadow of my father who was king. But that's just me. Whatever. 24. Now Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, Lord, he addresses them as Lord, wilt thou slay even a righteous nation? So, it's very interesting that a Philistine king would acknowledge / revere the God of the Hebrews in such a way. Now, this can be pointed to as supporting evidence that the Jehovah that we all know up to this point, who also goes by El Shaddai, is really just the Canaanite god El. Also important to note is the fact that when Jehovah, quote unquote, visited Pharaoh in his dream when this exact same thing happened in Genesis 12, he did not refer to their God in this sort of way, not even remotely similar, suggesting that Abimelech has at least some familiarity with this divine being. Which, like I said, very interesting. Also, very heretical of me to say. I'm quite fortunate that the church doesn't really do pyres anymore for witchcraft, at least not to my knowledge. So let's go ahead and scroll down here past this massive page break. Genesis 25. Said he not himself unto me, she is my sister? And she, even herself, said, he is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and the innocency of my hands have I done this. And God said unto him in the dream, yeah, I know that the integrity of thy heart thou hast done this, and I also withheld thee from sinning against me. Therefore suffered I thee not to touch her. God is essentially saying here, yeah, you know what? I know you were getting bamboozled, so I can't really fault you for this, even though I just got done saying that you were a dead man walking literally 5 seconds ago. You can't even defend this shit this time because Abraham is really just making business out of prostituting his wife, and Jehovah is a complicit, howling hypocrite who enables this very same sort of behavior. So, yeah, we're getting into the part 2 of Genesis NTR. Now, therefore, restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he shall pray for thee, and thou shalt live. And if thou restore her not, know thou that thou shalt surely die, thou and all that are thine. And Abimelech rose early in the morning, and he called all his servants, and told all these things in their ear. And the men were sore afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham, and said unto him, what hast thou done unto us? And wherein have I sinned against thee, that thou hast brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? Thou hast done deeds unto me that ought not to have been done. And Abimelech said unto Abraham, what sawest thou that thou hast done this thing? Genesis 20:11. And Abraham said, because I thought, surely the fear of God is not in this place, and they will slay me for my wife's sake. This is the flimsiest justification I think I have ever heard for anything. It's essentially the same thing as Abraham in a trial saying, Your Honor, I murdered that man in cold blood just because I wanted to make sure that the police were actually still doing their job. You know what, Abraham? Fuck you. That's all I really have to say on that. But then we get a revelation in 2012. Not about the world ending, but about more biblical incest. Yay! Excuse me. And moreover, she is indeed my sister, the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother. And she became my wife. Sweet home Alabama. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is what you call completely tacked on lore. So Sarah is, by Abraham's own admission, his half-sister and has been this entire time. For whatever reason, it hasn't been mentioned yet, but this line has been taken to heart when biblical genealogy has been drawn up in like some sort of family tree. Remember how I said that this whole chapter was kind of filler? Yeah, they probably should have left this one out, as seeing as nothing really happens save this incredibly damning revelation. My hope is that if you take away anything from these live streams, it's that Abraham is an incestuous, pimping, snake oil salesman and does not deserve half of the reverence that he gets. Genesis 20:13. Gangnam Style. And it came to pass when God caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said unto her, This is thy kindness which thou shalt show unto me. At every place whither we shall come, say of me, He is my brother. And Abimelech took sheep and oxen and men servants and women servants, and gave them unto Abraham, and restored Sarah his wife. And Abimelech said, Behold, my land is before thee, dwell where it pleaseth thee. This doesn't really mean anything, because as far as I can tell, they just kind of go back to their tent city. Genesis 20:16. Oh, what a great year. And unto Sarai he said, Behold, I have given thy brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Behold, it is for thee covering of the eyes to all that are with thee, and in respect of all thou art righted. And Abraham prayed unto God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his maidservants, that they bare children. For Jehovah had fast closed up the wombs of all the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. When the hell was this stipulation put onto his sinning? They never said anything about violating the wombs of the Gerarites. The Gerarites, I guess. Only that Abimelech would surely die for taking a supposedly 90-year-old woman as a wife for no real apparent reason. Yeah, Genesis 20 gets overlooked, same as Genesis 12. I'm glad that I could bring this information to some of you, but I mean, it's really hard to be openly condemning of this whole thing, especially considering everything that preceded it in Genesis 19. But yeah, God, fuck Abraham. It's a total piece of shit. So anyway, those are the chapters that we are going to read for today's presentation. If anybody has any questions, be sure to leave them in the live chat, and I will get to them swiftly. As of right now, I'm just going to try and catch up with the chat and drink something so that my throat does not die. It feels like it is made out of sandpaper as of right now. And if there aren't any questions, then, we'll just kind of move swiftly along to ending today's presentation. Ryan, I just drew a lady big old gazongas. Can I relate that to this week's sermon? Tangentially, I guess. If you want to make some sort of connection to Sarah being taken in as a wife yet again by her pimping husband, you could maybe argue that it's because she has some tiggle bitties, and that kind of makes up for the fact that she's old and wrinkled and half dead. The 15th, excuse me. Hi there, can't stay for long since I got to go to work soon, but I'll watch when I can. Well, you kind of came in at the wrong time anyway, so it's probably best that you just go back and watch this whole thing over. Yeah, wow, this is actually a much shorter episode than last time, probably because I didn't spend the first half hour bitching and complaining about YouTube. Neat. So for an incestuous creepy fuck, he sure did become an influence. It's strange who, I assume how, people latch onto a larger than life figure. Yeah, I guess really the main reason as to why, like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are all called the Abrahamic faith is more or less just because he's like common denominator to all of those faiths, sort of as like he's seen as a patriarch to all of them, whereas like Islam, obviously, Muhammad is said to be like a descendant of Ishmael. Obviously, the 12 tribes of Israel are all descended from Isaac specifically, and then then you go down a little bit further to the tribe of Judah, and then to King David, and then you follow down the family tree a little bit, you get eventually to Jesus. That's mainly the whole reason why he's mentioned. I don't think if it were like separated by like a generation or so, like if Isaac was really just like the progenitor of all three faiths, they would probably call it like the Isaac faiths or something like that. I don't know. I feel like they don't really want to draw too much attention to Abraham, or at least they shouldn't want to draw too much attention to Abraham, but they mostly just give them that naming convention more or less out of necessity. Anastasia, this is like a fever dream. Yeah, that's what happens when you actually read the Bible, as opposed to like somebody just like randomly quoting one of the Psalms or something like that. Like a lot of people like to cherry pick the Bible. I'm just kind of going in raw, no rubber, and I'm presenting everything to you as it is actually written. What you do with it is entirely up to you. I have no real agenda in doing this aside from morbid curiosity. Do you think these passages are left out intentionally? Ironically, it was like it was reading the Bible from cover to cover that influenced my decision to no longer be religious. Well, first of all, congratulations for actually undertaking that endeavor. Second of all, it absolutely is. So the Hebrew Bible as it exists right now has a lot of things that were omitted or otherwise changed at the advent of Christianity. So, like, for example, the book of Job transforms Ha-Satan into the proper noun Satan with a capital letter. Just because, well, now Satan is a character as far as, the New Testament is concerned. And so they needed to draw a little bit of parallels from some more Old Testament passages, even though I do believe Satan proper is actually referenced in Chronicles, but Chronicles is next to Daniel, the youngest addition to the Old Testament. And of course, he's only mentioned once, so it's kind of doesn't really help to support their position. Yes, there were quite a few things that were cut out from the Bible, but there was also a lot of things that were lost at the time, like the Dead Sea Scrolls and stuff like that. They didn't really have access to them, so they couldn't really pick or choose between, those stories in terms of like what to include in the anthology of the Bible. And, there's also, you get into that whole issue of like religious sects, like the Ethiopian church chooses to include the Book of Enoch. Catholicism chooses to include the Book of Tobit. Things like that. So my plan for this series is to go through the Bible proper, both Old and New Testament. Or actually, you know what? We might just stop after we get to the end of the Old Testament, and then we'll kind of go back and go over like the Testament of Adam and Eve, maybe the Book of Jubilees, even though that's kind of redundant. We'll definitely get into Enoch, because I think it's I think it's criminal that that book is, kind of excluded from, the early Bible. But in terms of like pacing, I can kind of understand why. Uh, yeah, there's a lot of like really fascinating things to cover. My personal favorites is the Gospel of Thomas, or the Gospel of Infant Jesus, because oh my God, that kid was a psychopath. I really want to get into that, but at the same time, there's a lot of other things I'm looking forward to. We're going to be getting into the rape of Dinah a little bit later on, which is probably my favorite story in Genesis because it's hilarious how that one ends. Also, the books of Samuel, First Kings, and things like that. It's a lot more interesting because of how they were described to me in one of the books that I read, and then like going back and actually reading through that again, I'm like, oh wow, like that's it's a lot more interesting than it initially seems. So we'll definitely be getting into all that eventually, but as of right now, we're going to leave off at Genesis 20 for episode 5 here. Episode 6, I think we should be able to stretch all the way out until Genesis 25, and that is, believe it or not, only the halfway point for Genesis. Thankfully, Genesis is the 4th longest book in the entire canonical Bible. So everything else gets a lot shorter from there, and Proverbs is like 150 chapters. The thing is, or not Proverbs, Psalms is like 150 chapters, but they're all very short. It's essentially like slam poetry, so we should be able to get through the majority of that book fairly quickly. Really, the big hurdles for us to get over as of right now in terms of the Pentateuch is Genesis and Exodus, and then like Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy are mostly have to do with laws in the Hebrew faith, and they don't really factor too much into like lore, so we should be able to knock those out fairly quickly. If I do this consistently enough, we should be done with Genesis before the end of this year. So, yeah. All right. So, in any case, thank you all so very much for joining us today for this presentation. It really does mean a lot to me that, you guys are still very much so interested in just some nerd sitting around and reading the Bible autistically and giving his notes. But like I said, I am a bit sleep deprived, so I'm probably just going to go right back to bed. But yeah, thank you all so very much for watching. And until next time, I hope you all have a God's blessed day.